everybody. We're waiting for Gracie Gold to join very soon. Well, hello there.
Hello.
How are you?
Good. How are you?
I'm doing really well. It is great to see you. And hi, everyone out there. Thanks so much for joining us. My name is Matt Inman. I'm an editor at Crown Publishing here in New York. And I am very excited to be talking to Olympic bronze medalist, two-time U.S. champion, and as of today, February 6th, published author Gracie Gold, whose memoir, Outofshapeworthlessloser, is available everywhere books are sold today. How does it feel?
Feels crazy the fact that it'd be, I'm used to the national champion and like Olympian intro, and
Right.
now author. It's been crazy. It's been a crazy day, but also super amazing. I feel like it'll hit me as the week goes on.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I'm sure. Well, I mean, I think part of the thing, I think a lot of things, something that people don't realize about book publishing is how long the timeline actually is. I was thinking before we talked, when we first started talking, and it was 2 years ago, it was during the 2022 Olympics. We were sort of talking about, who was winning and getting this book going. So I kind of want to take people all the way back, right to the beginning, and ask you, you're still skating, you have a lot going on in your life. What made you want to write a memoir?
Um, Really great question. I think it started when after, treatment, and I had that press release that kind of described why I dropped off the face of the earth for like 90 days. And just the genuine shock from like the skating and like just the sports community that, I would be so brave to talk about like mental health issues and, an eating disorder. And I remember thinking, I don't know why everyone's acting like this is the first time this has ever happened, or that I somehow am special or unique for any of these issues. And, I kind of started from there and just snowballed, and many more interesting things happened. And yeah, I guess we sent it out to some publishers, right? And people were like, we think you have a story to tell. And today's the day it gets told.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's personally so exciting for me. I mean, as you know, and it's kind of an unusual situation here. Before I was an editor here in New York, I was a competitive ice dancer for all of my teens. And then I came to New York, and it's so rare to get to talk to someone who is so candid about the sport, both kind of like its joys and its challenges, the way you are in this book. And it has been really fun to kind of go on this kind of journey together with you. And I was just going to say, for people who are just tuning in, I just want to say we're going to talk a little bit about the sort of the process of creating this book and the conversations we had. But then we're going to leave a little time at the end just for kind of a fun little lightning round with getting to know Gracie Gold, and maybe open it up for a few questions at the very end. But going back to when you were writing a memoir, I'm curious, I mean, as an editor, I have to ask you, were there other books you had in mind that you read that kind of you were thinking about as you sat down to start writing this memoir?
Well, I had read Educated in Glass
Mhm.
Castles, which I know are like pretty famous ones, and I really liked, yeah, just how like vulnerable and authentic and honest those were. And then also Jeanette McCurdy's, like I'm Glad My Mom's Dead.
Oh, we
Obviously,
love
obviously like a polarizing title, but I just thought that was really, really good and really well written. So yeah, so those are probably like my top three examples heading into it. But reading a memoir, like someone's autobiography, and liking it is much different than writing your own. It was really quite the journey we've been on.
Yeah, well, I mean, and I think it's, you spent so many years kind of constructing programs and sort of refining them. In some ways there are similarities, but I think kind of piecing together your story and your experiences and sort of being vulnerable in public in a very different way is a big deal. And I'm wondering if you could talk about, once you sat down, a lot of people talk about wanting to write a memoir, but when you sit down and you start to think about it, it can be challenging. I'm wondering if you could like tell us a little bit about maybe like the most enjoyable parts of this process and also the most challenging.
I mean, I think one of the more enjoyable parts, I mean, of the whole process was seeing it all come together, because for so long, putting the manuscript together in a way that made sense, and the editing and the editing. And then I feel like in a flash, we had, the mock cover and like the gallery copies. And I was like, oh my God, it's here and it's everything I could have hoped for and more. I think the editing was tough. I'm not a great editing stuff out. It's me, right? I'm a big talker. And just being able to try to pick and choose all the stories, and I wanted just to tell so many more. And then there are hard parts of the book, so those were difficult to write and to put into words, and then edit them, and also think like, oh my God, someone's going to read this kind of not flattering story of me. But again, I had to include all of the ugly parts because I wanted it to be, a really authentic memoir. And, if I just talked about the good stuff, like that's not, first off, not a very interesting story. And secondly, it's not a real story.
Yeah, well, and I think, that's one of the things that I hope people enjoy about the book is you talk very compellingly about so much of your life as Gracie Gold was projecting a perfect image to everyone. I mean, it's something I think in the skating world we're taught from a young age to always, never let people see you sort of be difficult or cry or anything in public. And I guess one question, maybe you could talk a little bit about the book. One of the big conversations that I was about structuring the book and how to think about your experience. And we ultimately, I mean, I think you had this idea to sort of like think about the different versions of yourself. Maybe you could talk to everyone just a little bit about that decision and who the various versions of you they're going to meet in this book are.
I mean, I'm only a first time author, so some things I didn't know, but I thought, oh, if I was going to tell my story, like there were these distinct moments where I feel things pivoted. So where I went from, right, the book is the 4 parts. So where it went from Grace Elizabeth childhood and how I kind of had this image for a long time of this kind of, sickly sweet ice princess. Like at what point did that shift? And
Yeah.
then at what point, how did we get from the Olympics to like a rehab facility? Like how did we get there? And then now, where do we go from there? Like post mental health crisis, trying to have a healthy relationship with skating. And so that to me just made the most sense logically to structure it that way. Yeah, and I wanted to tell the whole story, so I couldn't just start in the middle, but I think starting towards the beginning of the book, like the actual story of how I started skating, like that's made like the most sense to start. And I mean, I even like the prologue is one of my favorite chapters, actually. But yeah, structuring it was crazy. I'm glad that I had like people like you on my team, because left to my own devices, the book would have been like 700 pages long, and it just would have just been tangents. Like absolutely nothing would have come together in a way that you could read it cover to cover. Um, but yeah, it was just a really wild experience. Not everything feels like something else. And I do have to say, people ask me like, what was writing a memoir like? I was like, I don't even know what to compare it to, because it was so fun. It was crazy. It was exciting, nerve-wracking sometimes, cathartic. Like it was all of these things in one.
Yeah, and I mean, and I think, I remember so many of the conversations and the kind of back and forth we had. And, I think part of it, what's interesting about memoir, and a lot of those memoirs you mentioned at the beginning, I mean, not only they're complicated family stories, which we can talk about a little bit too, but, when you have a little bit of distance on your life, you wrote this book almost 10 years after you were at the Olympics and a number of years after you'd been out of treatment. I'm curious what the process of, like putting out, like, it's like all the memories of your life are like pictures on a table and you're just trying to like make sense of the order of everything in a different way. Maybe you can talk about like, how do you understand your life and what you've been through differently now that you've written this book?
It's interesting, right? It was written 10 years after I went to the Olympics, and yet I find the book that talks about the last 10 years to be wildly more interesting, really, than the first 10 years. And I realized that I didn't really meet myself until kind of around treatment time. And I sometimes look back at the very naive rather volatile, too honest, like childhood Gracie, and also the plastic Barbie. Even if I go back and watch interviews, like they played the one on the Today Show, super cringe. She seems like the most unlikable. It was just so
You were shooting
rehearsed.
stars and hoping for the best and wanted to just try your hardest.
Like dream big. I'm gonna do my best and forget the
Yeah.
rest. Um, no, and I like don't even relate to her at all sometimes. But yeah, to put the book together, I mean, yeah, the hardest part was picking and choosing like which stories to keep in and which to take out and maybe save for another time. And yeah, as I said, talking about the difficult parts, like were difficult, especially sometimes recording the audiobook. And then um there are even so many like other funny random stories that ultimately didn't fit into the big picture, but like editing those out, uh but they were like better for the storyline. And yeah, just kind of seeing it all laid out in one final book was kind of wild.
Yeah, no, right. I mean, I think once you see the arc of it, and I hope people when they read it, they kind of see your story and it through different eyes. And I think one of the interesting things is when you set out to write this book, you had talked about your story to some degree. I mean, certainly you were very forthcoming about the challenges with your mental health, stepping away from the sport. I mean, this was back in, was this 2017, 2018 when you went into recovery and sort of were very public about it. And yeah, I hope, and I think people will be surprised by this book, about what you reveal. Could you talk, like, what do you think people are going to be surprised by when they read this book?
I mean, I think a lot of things, I at some point I really, although people are like brave and vulnerable for speaking out, with mental health and some of my struggles, I remember thinking, oh, this is really actually just scratching the surface. There's actually a lot more other things. But I also knew that I wanted to talk about some, because again, when you kind of mid-Olympic season just like disappear off the face of
Yeah.
the earth, you do have to eventually, some people are going to wonder like, where did you go and what happens? But yeah, I think people will be like genuinely surprised in some of the chapters and some of the stories. And yeah, I mean, a trigger warning for a lot of things. This is definitely not a kid's book. It is not a fluffy, super sweet sports memoir. Those are great books. This is not one of them. Um, was there anything that you found surprising, like when reading the book, maybe something you wouldn't have known?
So, I mean, I think, having been around the sport, both in my days competing, but also I briefly worked kind of around the coverage of skating. I had been conditioned to a lot of skaters feeling a lot of pressure because it's a judge sport to project a certain kind of message, regardless of what they were going through behind the scenes. And I think what was shocking to me was, even though we knew to some degree that you were struggling, just how difficult, how significant your struggles were. And I think there are some places where, for example, you talk about how people in the media or commentators were talking about you and they had no idea what was actually going on behind the scenes. I think it surprised me because it made me really think about that we never really know exactly what is happening in people's lives, and that, maybe we should give them a little bit more empathy. But when you talk about surprising, I mean, we have to talk about the title, right? I mean, we talked a lot about the title and the subtitle of this book. And, I think we batted around a bunch of different ideas, but we ultimately landed on Out of Shape, Worthless Loser, all one word. As an editor, had to like take a breath. But I think ultimately, when you talked about that voice in your mind, it just was there could be no other, I think, title for this book to signal how different it was. But can you tell us, who is Out of Shape, Worthless Loser? How do they manifest for you? Why did you call it that?
I mean, I think I first started calling it that because that's like honestly what I felt like, watching a lot of my friends and teammates compete at the Olympics after I had been out of a rehab facility for only a few months. And I was like, look at them living their dream. And I'm just this like shape, worthless loser. Like I nothing, if I don't have skating, like what can I provide to society? You know, what's my role? Am I just going like, what do I like? I have nothing to offer. And as someone who, um, you know, very much based their self-worth on their productivity in general, but like particularly on the ice, when that was gone, I really struggled with that, and that voice in my head that, yeah, was like, you're just as out of shape, worthless loser. Like, what are you gonna do? Yeah, I mean, at that point, I think it was clear like what we needed to call it. And also, yeah, I mean, we couldn't name it like Go for Gold.
Like it or something.
Yeah, like there's just, all of the gold puns have been used. There's higher. Um, and yeah, I mean, like Jeanette McCurdy's book, like I love that title. I feel like if you know, you know. And I've always had a bit of a dark sense of humor, warped maybe is a better word. And so I wanted something to reflect that in the
Yeah.
title.
And I think, I mean, it certainly signals how candid you are. And I think also, I mean, going back to what surprised me is that how, in a way, is relatable that voice is. I mean, we have very different experiences in the world, but I think, you know, to some degrees, I have a voice like that, or I've had a voice like that, and the way you articulate what that conversation is and how you've sort of battled that voice is actually making me think. I'm seeing in the chat some people are asking how you're doing now. So could you talk a little bit about, like, you know, what is your relationship with Out of Shape Worthless Loser now, and how are you doing now?
Oh, so much better. Especially from that part 3 in the book where like when I met this like out of shape, worthless loser version of myself, just so much better. I mean, I'm like an author now, so
Exactly right.
yeah, no, I mean, it's definitely been a journey, and I think I had this illusion, you know, and I think I did silence that voice in my head for a long time because, you know, I was an Olympian, and I thought that by winning enough accolades and landing enough jumps and just being, you know, like as perfect as possible, it gave me, I think Brene Brown kind of talks about it, like the illusion of perfectionism is that and achieve it, you know, it frees you from all criticism, when in fact that is just this myth. And so in the pursuit of that, you know, when I felt like as I said, I lost skating. So now I realize that I can live, you know, my self-worth is not tied to my productivity, and that whether or not I'm good at skating or not has no effect on who I am, you know, if I should still hold a place in this world or not. So in
Yeah.
that sense, we're doing better. I mean, granted at that time I did set the bar very, very low. But really, really good. I feel really good about this year.
Yeah, I mean, because I mean, there's a version of this story where you just step away from skating and you say, I don't want to do this anymore, or like, I was once doing it at this level, and if I can't be perfect, I'd rather not do it at all, and you just like never get to enjoy it again. And I actually think, and I want to talk a little bit about this, one of the things I admire about this book is that, you know, we talked about, you're like, I don't want people to like leave this book hating figure skating. I don't want them to come away thinking figure skating is a terrible thing, I hate it, and I don't want to do it anymore, and no one else should. I think you argue that figure skating is beautiful. You love it. We talked a lot about it at the beginning of the book. It's actually important to show, you know, why you loved it in the first place, why you fought so hard to stay in it. It's actually the culture around it that is toxic and that you're trying to change. Could you actually, maybe we can geek out about skating now a little bit for the skating fans. What do you love about skating? Like, what have you always loved about skating?
Um, Great question. I mean, one of my favorite things, like when I'm in like a competitive season, is that I actually love the day-to-day grinds. I do love a routine. I have trouble sticking to one, but like when I do a lot better, and I like to try to have the same thing every day. And in that sense, skating and that day-to-day grind was always appealing, but I feel like I could tangibly see results like almost every single day. And if you know, if I had a great Monday, but even if my jumps were terrible on Tuesday, you know, at least that there was something, whether it was skating skills, spins, just having a better attitude, like trying harder, you know, that I could do better than the day before. And although maddening, because sometimes you feel like that goes the other way, where like everything has gotten worse all week, you know, you can see it go the other way. And that was right up my alley. And yeah, I mean, the hardest thing was trying to make sure that, as you said, that I should have answered this earlier, Was yeah, making sure that people like don't hate skating. You know, I want parents to sign their kids up for skating. If anything, I want skating to be more inclusive and more accessible. You know, it's not just a sport for like wealthy, you know, white children to start, that you can start at any age, right? Let's normalize having adult hobbies. And that I think it's just so wonderful. And, you know, I left skating and I came back to it, not because I felt like it was my
Right.
only option, but because I was like, oh, you know what I miss in my life? Skating. Like even just skating around like a very casual session. That's the part that I miss. Like the actual act of just like gliding on the ice.
Oh,
Um, and, and wanting to make sure that although I had some issues and a lot of that, it was all this stuff around skating and also my own poor coping mechanisms. I never really had healthy coping mechanisms modeled for me in my upbringing by really any caregiver. And I handled some stress and the intense disappointment after certain events really poorly.
yeah, yeah. And I want to talk a little bit more about kind of your involvement in skating now in a second, but I wanted to ask, you're talking about the experience of gliding and being on the ice. Question for you. When I think of your skating, you both like just technically, I mean, your triple Lutz is a thing of beauty. Everyone knows that. It's just a gorgeous, gorgeous thing. But also artistry is another huge part of skating, which, you know, I think you developed over the course of your career. What do you enjoy more? The technical side or the like artistry and presentation side?
Look, so I'm not perfect, right? Okay, so that being said, I tend to like things better when I'm good at them.
Perfect.
Uh, like a groundbreaking concept, but I think in a lot of ways I was drawn to jumping more than spinning or any other part because I was really good at it and I like things that I'm good at. And um, yeah, like large parts, there were huge parts of jumping that came naturally to me, not all of it, but large parts. And so that was frustrating at times because when you could kind of sometimes if something comes really naturally to you, sometimes it's hard to recreate it because it's just feeling and maybe not like a solid concrete technical thought. Um, and like if I ever lost the feeling, I think of like my outside edge on my Lutz for whatever reason, I think I would really struggle to get it back because it's just always been there. Like I've always just had a really deep outside edge on Lutz.
Right.
I don't Lutz if I tried.
Yeah.
um, but that would be one that would be difficult. And I eventually came to love skating skills, but for a long time I avoided them because I wasn't naturally as gifted at them, and subsequently, especially in my teenage years, like didn't want to do them. But you know, it just took like there were a couple of really good coaches I had that broke it down in a way that I didn't feel stupid. I didn't feel like, oh, why doesn't this match your jumping? I was like, oh, like maybe you just don't know, because I was again really naturally gifted at a lot of jumps. People look at my skating skills and be like, oh, you must not be trying because
Right.
the hard stuff comes really easily. And so it took other coaches like, oh, maybe you just actually need someone to literally hold your hand and like walk you through these mechanisms. And I eventually came to really, really like them and enjoy them.
Well,
And spinning and I are
yeah.
fun. Like I've
Well, it speaks, I mean, it definitely speaks like what you're talking about is like the role of a good coach to sort of like be able to sort of get you and how to like get you to improve in a way that works for you. Which does lead me, I want to talk, I mean, this is flying by, but I do want you to talk a little bit about, we talked a lot earlier today about your coaching, especially working with adult skaters. And can you talk about like the role coaching plays in your life and how you see sort of that part of your life going forward?
I mean, now that I'm like grown up, like ish, right? I realize that I mean, coaching is you have to wear a lot of different hats. And, you know, I mean, my coaches, a lot of them were really important caregivers for me. Like I saw them more than my parents. And the coaches that were able to at times inspire me, also coaches that were able to redirect me. Because a lot of times my perfectionist energy, if we could harness it, it'd be really good. But a lot of times, I used to describe it as the toy car that you pull back and then forward.
Right.
I would rather just be hitting the wall
Yeah.
because it was still going. And so I needed someone just to like redirect the energy, and as well as coaches that were really good at critiquing me without shaming me. Because I feel like when that shame gets involved, that's when like the out of shape, worthless loser kind of voice comes in. And coaches that were able to do that without making me feel like there was something wrong with me because of how I skated or how poorly, or if I couldn't figure something out. I never felt, if I didn't feel stupid, or if they're like, oh, why can't you, like, as if there's something wrong with me for not understanding a concept. Those coaches were the ones that were really, really fundamental. And, I try to bring that into my coaching. No one's perfect, but, certainly have my moments.
Well, yeah, and you were saying earlier, I mean, I thought this was really interesting, is that you love coaching just in general, but particularly love adult skaters, many of whom are, maybe they skated when they were younger and they gave it up, maybe because of the toxic culture around it that you talked about, and they're giving it a try again, or they're trying it for the first time. But like they're trying to do it on their own terms, which is kind of like what you're doing right now in an interesting way. What is it that, what do you think it is that you love so much about working with adults?
I mean, so skating, and specifically like jump technique, sometimes spins, but like mostly jumps, is one of my hyperfixations. And adults love to know, they want to know everything about it.
Yeah.
With kids, sometimes you have to be like, you have to grab them and be like, all right, so what are you going to do with your right arm? And they're like, I don't know. And like, they just go do it again. Or they're like, literally, I don't care. I'm just going to go do it again. But with adults, they want to know, like, I had an adult one time ask me, like, what, if their left arm was a paintbrush, bear with me. If their left arm was a paintbrush, what shape, or like what would, and if the wall was a canvas, like what shape would their arm draw as they jump through a sow cow? And I was like, I have absolutely no idea, but I can't wait to find out together. I was like, I don't know, I've never really thought about the shape that my arm traces in the air while I'm doing a sow, but like, let's find out. I'm happy to tell you and report back. And yeah, they just like hang on every detail. And I think because they, again, are, their front lobes are closed, and they also understand the value of like, and when someone's trying to help you, et cetera, et cetera. And they just like love skating. And as somebody who also loves skating, it works really well together.
Well, and I think, I'm seeing in the comments, I'm just seeing a few people who clearly have maybe had kids or they've been coached by you, sort of praising their experiences and that people loved working with you. And I realized like we're almost, this is truly zooming by. We could talk all night. But I do want to ask you one more question and then do a little lightning round before we call it. But so all day today, for all the folks out there, Gracie has been answering questions basically since about 8 a.m. this morning. I want to ask you.
Vinny. Hi, Vinny.
Oh, Vinny, one of your students?
Yeah. That's
hey, Vinny.
Double flip,
Thank
Vinny.
you for coming. Congrats on your double flip. So people have been asking questions all day. What question do you wish people had asked you today about the book that they didn't?
I mean, there are a couple of parts of the book that I didn't get asked a lot, but I don't know if they're really like lightning.
Yeah.
One, not to kind of insert like a different question, but whenever things that I wish I got asked more is, in skating you get asked a lot of the same questions, like how did it feel out there?
Right.
What differently tomorrow?
Right.
What are you gonna do on practice tomorrow? And it's like kind of the same stuff, like where you can really almost go on autopilot. But I do find, especially with younger kids, I get asked some of the most interesting questions. And it's now one of my Roman empires. I think about this kid all the time, but it was the first question at, no, I'm not kidding. It was the first question at a meet and greet, like right after COVID. So things were kind of opening up. And she's 8 or 9, maybe. These like round glasses and like bright blonde bun. And I was like, yeah. And she's like, her first question was, like, how did you get over it? And I was like, what? And she's like, so serious. She's like, the big sad. And I was like, wow, I've never heard it worded that way. It was also like a really heavy way to start a meet and greet. And then she follows it up Some kids are shy at first, so no one else raised their hand. And she's like, "Did you go to the place with the socks?" And she's talking about what like TikTok would probably call grippy socks, like the kinds that you might wear in like a psych
Oh,
ward. Yeah, and if you're out there, small child, I think about these questions every day. It's in my top two favorite questions I've ever been asked, but some stuff like that does make me pause and think. Anything out of the ordinary, like these are the questions that I love to get asked. Even like the adult skater that was like, what shape does my arm
yeah.
paint in the air on a sow? Again, I was like, I've never been asked that. I've never thought of it that way. I'm normally thinking about my right arm, but like, let's find out. I love any and all like interesting.
How did you answer that little girl?
I said that I did not go to the place with the socks, but that there are different types of treatment centers. So I was like, great question, just so people know there's different types of and inpatient, but I was, allowed, I went to an inpatient and I was allowed socks and that I could, leave whenever I wanted to. I was like, it's called AMA and just kind of like walked her through that. And then the next kid's question was like, do you like giraffes?
Yeah.
And the position was like so funny. But yeah, I think of her all the time. And I mean, just cute as a button. Like,
I mean, also, and also, like, I mean, great that you just talked about it very openly, right? Like, so many of these things were made to feel that there are things you just don't talk about. Like, we don't talk about these things. If you're seen getting treatment, if you're in therapy, like, so many of us grew up feeling like that was just not something you talked about. So, probably meant a lot to her that you
I think
did.
lying to kids is
Yeah.
like ridiculous because kids are like very intuitive. So sometimes they know that something's weird. And when adults clam up about a situation and they're like, don't worry about it, it's fine. Or no, don't worry. That kid knows like, oh, that was a weird reaction to that question. Like they didn't answer it. So, then suddenly it feels like a taboo subject.
Right.
When it comes to stuff like mental health, like it just isn't.
Yeah.
And again, just have still to this day never been asked that question again. But like those are the questions that I remember and the kids and adults that I remember. Like whenever you get something that's not, how did it feel out there?
Right. Right.
Your dress, like it's just so pretty. Great questions, but again, like to be asked them for the last 12 years.
Nice to be asked the questions you want to answer now. So, all right. Well, we want to get you out of here at some point, but I do want to ask you, just kind of, right? I think that memoir it is like getting to know you in many many different ways, and I think one of the interesting things about this book is that I mean there are elements of this book that are very you're really candidly and sort of honestly dealing with difficult stuff, but also just your dark sense of humor comes through loud and clear. So I want to just ask you kind of like a few lightning round questions so that like everyone watching can kind of get to know you a little bit better. And we're going to just like first thing to your mind. If you want to explain a little bit, that's fine, but just whatever comes to your mind. Okay. First one, Grammys were last weekend. Favorite musician?
Well, so I love Miley Cyrus's performance at the Grammys. I know not everyone did and not everyone liked her look. I loved it. I really did. And she had, I think she had said like, she's kind of trying to body like Tina Turner. I like the whole thing. I feel like people that just didn't get it. But my favorite, my favorite like artist right now is Noah Khan.
Yes.
And I'm saying that right because I've said that in like several interviews today. But his Stick Season album, I mean, I listened to when I first heard that song on TikTok, it was like I remember like I think I liked his like first or second video he ever posted.
Yeah.
Like a fan, and the album is so good. So obsessed. Like most played. My top 25 most played are almost entirely his album.
Okay, so Noah Khan, you have a fan out here. Okay, favorite skater of all time?
Probably Yoona Kim. I mean, she was literally everything that I wasn't, and same with Michelle Kwan. And my sister Carly. She was really good at things. We kind of were just opposites. Yeah. So, power jumper, but she was so quick. To this day, she's still the quickest rotator I've seen in a long time. Her spread eagles for days, she could just power pull down the ice, and her spread eagles, they're still to this day, and Frank agrees, Carol, like the best spread eagles, like me ever. And so although our skating styles were very different, in a lot of ways, I preferred hers because at the end of her program, she could do spread eagles, Ina Bowers, and spirals. And my things were all like jump tricks.
Right.
Doing Russian split, Russian split, butterfly,
Right.
another one. And she's like hanging out.
Love it. Okay, I have to by law ask you, best book you've read recently.
I mean, I love the giant Dolly Parton book, and it is fantastic. It is really good, and it's also pink, which is like a superior color. And I mean, again, I know I said it, but I really love Jeanette's.
Yeah.
Is I'm Glad My Mother's Dead. I thought it was really, really good.
Great. Love that one too. Okay. Your favorite chapter in this book, your book.
I mean, I really like the prologue because I feel like it just gets right to it. And the other chapters, they're good, but I just feel like I think the prologue, and I think because it was the first chapter I read, because when we were reading that first manuscript, I started at the beginning. And I also like chapter 17 and some of the early days stuff, like reminiscing over some childhood stories and a lot of my particularly out of pocket behavior in my teenage years. Those were all really, really good.
Okay, so this is an oldie but a goodie, but you have a dinner party with 3 people, living or dead. Who are those people? Anyone.
The part of me that likes true crime is going to have different answers than the rest of me because I do have some questions. I guess I would go. So this is actually strange. I've actually never really been asked this question before, but I know that people have been asked this question, and I just feel like there's so many right answers. I mean, I think Princess Di, and then I might go with Amelia Earhart because I just really want to know what happened.
Okay.
And there's so many right answers. I wish like I could have
a lot of people are asking if you're still friends with Taylor Swift. Are you, and would she be there?
Friends was, oh, I forgot you said living or dead.
Yeah.
She's still here. She would, I mean, I've already had dinner with her on a couple of occasions, and I got to meet her cat Meredith. Very novelty experience for me, and her beautiful apartment. But I mean, she might be there. We had a great time every single time for my birthday. Well, our birthday with Carly this past year. Really wanted to go to Catalina Island, and she texted me, "Oh, have you ever been?" And into a group chat, and I got to write back. I actually have gone one time. I went on a yacht with Taylor Swift, and I was like, "Oh my god, I'm insufferable."
Okay, so we have to let you go. We have 2 more questions for you, and then we'll let you go. Best piece of advice that anyone has ever given you?
Again, so many possible answers. One that I've used like a lot is like, don't take criticism for someone that you wouldn't go to for advice. So I even use things like, if I wouldn't, like, I can't take their criticism on my music, my choreography, or my dress if I wouldn't also, you know, DM them or call them up and say, you know, and take their advice. So I can't take their criticism, right? If one is invalid, they're both invalid.
That's good. That's timeless advice. Okay, last question. What is the one thing you hope that most that people take from this book?
Again, like, just I'm not sure if this like app I can even give a lightning answer on this. I guess that it's just not always, life and people are not always what they seem. And you know, I think I'll be a lot more relatable, because I know for a long time I was kind of an unrelatable person, and that I came off right as this, you know, like plastic Barbie doll with this like perfect Midwestern family that was really good at skating and then went to the Olympics, and it was like, yay, but like a not particularly interesting story. And yeah, just that I'm like a real person, and I'm definitely not the Grace Kelly perfect ice princess. In fact, I almost thought it was hilarious that people were like, oh, she's kind of just like frozen, like
Yeah.
relatable, like just not. And I was like, oh, I have like a warped sense of humor. I have historically like volatile feelings, and just that for all of its faults, skating is still something that's really important to me and really beautiful to me, and that, you know, and also that, I mean, that the sport is worth pursuing. And although sometimes it feels inaccessible and unattainable and it's not for everyone, you know, even USFS is rebranded this year with the hashtag skating is for everyone. And that's something that I truly believe. As I said in the beginning, like you don't have to be, you know, it can feel like if you don't start before 12, that you can't skate. And that just factually isn't true. You know, um, and just that all people are welcome in ice rinks and that it's not as stuffy and traditional as I'm sure some people think it is. Like most skaters are actually very cool, like very, some might call us like liberal snowflakes, very progressive.
All right. Well, that, I mean, those are, I will admit that wasn't a very good question on my part for a lightning round because there's a lot to get into, but I think those are all great. I think absolutely you come across as a real person in this book. A lot of people in the chat, I don't know if you're seeing the comments, they're saying you're a great role model. They're proud of you. I'm proud of you. We're proud of you at Crown. Congratulations on the publication of Out of Shape, Worthless Loser. For everyone out there, if you have not already bought the book, you can look at graciegoldbook.com or dip into your favorite place to buy and read books. I hope you enjoy it. And thank you, Gracie, so much for taking so much time, and enjoy today.
No, thank you. And thank you for all of your hard work. And yeah, thank you guys so much. And I hope everyone loves the book and I can't wait to see what you guys think of it.
Yes, please, as people read, please share with friends wherever you can share your thoughts on the book. We appreciate it. We want to start a conversation with it, and we hope we
Yes,
will.
absolutely.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, guys.